On July 24, 1944 at 45 a.m. one engineer made a decision that saved 200 troops from certain death. He had only 30 minutes to build a bridge across a 50-foot deep ravine. The enemy was closing in. The engineer Lieutenant James Wilson was part of the 101st Airborne Division. He had been tasked with securing a strategic location, but the terrain proved to be a major obstacle. With the enemy approaching, Wilson had to think fast. He remembered a conversation with a local farmer about a possible crossing point, but it was untested. Wilson's team worked tirelessly to build the improvised bridge. They used local materials including wooden planks and rope to construct a makeshift crossing. As they worked, the enemy began to close in. The sound of artillery fire grew louder and the team knew they had to act fast. Finally, after 25 minutes of intense work, the bridge was complete. The troops began to cross just as the enemy arrived. The bridge held and the troops made it to safety. 101st Airborne Division improvised bridge. World War II engineer Lieutenant James Wilson. But then something unexpected happened. What they discovered next changed everything. The shocking truth was about to surface. Underdog victory, fatal mistake, secret weapon, near-miss disaster, individual heroism. As the last of the troops made it to safety, Wilson and his team breathed a sigh of relief, their chests heaving with exhaustion. But their respite was short-lived, as the sound of enemy artillery fire grew even more intense, and the ground began to shake beneath their feet. The bridge, still swaying precariously in the wind, seemed to be holding, but Wilson knew it wouldn't last for long. He ordered his team to fall back and regroup, to prepare for the inevitable counterattack. As they pulled back, they stumbled upon a small, abandoned farmhouse, its stone walls bearing the scars of previous battles. Wilson, ever the opportunist, saw the potential for a makeshift command center and quickly set up shop, ordering his team to fortify the position. The farmer, who had provided Wilson with the crucial information about the crossing point, was found hiding in the cellar, his eyes wide with fear. Wilson reassured him, promising to do everything in his power to protect him and his family. The farmer, seemingly emboldened by Wilson's words, began to speak in hushed tones, telling tales of the enemy's movements, of secret tunnels and hidden bunkers. Wilson listened intently, his mind racing with the implications. The farmer's words painted a picture of a far more complex and sinister enemy than they had initially thought. As the farmer spoke, Wilson's team worked tirelessly to reinforce the farmhouse, piling up sandbags, and setting up a makeshift perimeter. But then, something unexpected happened. Just as they finished, a loud explosion rocked the ground, sending everyone scrambling for cover. The enemy had breached the perimeter, and a fierce firefight erupted, with bullets whizzing past their heads. Wilson, his training kicking in, took charge, directing his team's return fire, and expertly pinpointing the enemy's positions. The battle raged on for what seemed like hours, the air thick with the smell of smoke and sweat. As the fight intensified, Wilson spotted a glint of metal in the distance, an enemy tank making its way towards their position. He knew they couldn't hold out for much longer, not against such superior firepower. That's when he remembered the farmer's words, about the secret tunnels. With a burst of adrenaline, Wilson ordered his team to fall back, to make a break for the tunnels. They fought their way through the enemy lines, taking heavy fire, but managing to reach the entrance to the tunnels just as the tank was about to overrun their position. As they disappeared into the darkness, the tank's cannon fired, its shell exploding harmlessly outside, sending shrapnel flying everywhere. Wilson and his team collapsed against the walls, panting, their ears ringing from the explosion. The farmer, who had led them to the tunnels, smiled, a look of satisfaction on his face. "You see, Lieutenant," he said, "I told you, we have our ways of fighting back." Wilson nodded, his respect for the old man growing by the minute. The tunnels, it turned out, were a maze of narrow passageways, stretching for miles, and providing the perfect cover for a guerrilla campaign. Wilson's team set up a series of ambushes, using the tunnels to launch surprise attacks on the enemy, picking them off one by one. The enemy, confused and disoriented, stumbled into the traps, and Wilson's team took full advantage, whittling down their numbers. As the day wore on, the enemy's attacks grew more desperate, their troops becoming increasingly disorganized. Wilson's team, on the other hand, seemed to be gaining momentum, their confidence growing with every successful ambush. But just as they thought they had the upper hand, a new threat emerged, a group of enemy commandos, who had infiltrated the tunnels, intent on taking out Wilson and his team. The commandos, highly trained and deadly, moved stealthily through the tunnels, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Wilson's team, alerted to the new threat, went on high alert, their senses heightened as they waited for the commandos to make their move. The air was thick with tension, as the two groups waited, each one anticipating the other's next step. It was a game of cat and mouse, with the stakes higher than ever before. What came next would change everything. As the commandos crept closer, Wilson's team prepared to spring their trap, to take out the enemy in a burst of violence. But just as they were about to launch their attack, the sound of gunfire echoed through the tunnels, followed by the thud of footsteps, growing fainter with each passing second. The commandos, it seemed, had stumbled into one of Wilson's ambushes, and were now fleeing for their lives. The sudden silence was almost deafening, as Wilson's team waited, their guns still trained on the darkness. Then, without warning, a figure emerged from the shadows, a young woman, her face smudged with dirt, and her eyes blazing with determination. She introduced herself as a member of the local resistance, and told Wilson that she had been tracking the commandos, intent on taking them out. Wilson, his instincts on high alert, eyed the woman warily, unsure if he could trust her. But as she spoke, he began to realize that she was telling the truth, that she was a valuable ally in the fight against the enemy. Together, they hatched a plan to take out the remaining commandos, and to launch a final, decisive attack on the enemy's stronghold. The battle was far from over, but with the woman's help, Wilson's team might just have a chance to turn the tide, to emerge victorious against all odds. As they prepared to launch their attack, Wilson couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off, that there was more to the woman's story than she was letting on. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. The woman, sensing his unease, smiled, a look of reassurance on her face. "We'll get through this, Lieutenant," she said, "together." But as they set off into the unknown, Wilson couldn't help but wonder if he had just made a fatal mistake, one that would haunt him for the rest of his days. As they moved through the tunnels, the woman, whose name was Sophie, proved to be a valuable asset, knowing the passageways like the back of her hand and expertly navigating them to avoid detection. Wilson's team followed closely behind, their guns at the ready, as they made their way deeper into the heart of the enemy's stronghold. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and mold, and the sound of dripping water echoed off the walls, making it seem like they were being watched by unseen eyes. Sophie stopped suddenly, her hand raised in a warning gesture, and Wilson's team froze, their ears straining to pick up any sound. The shocking truth was about to surface. For a moment, there was complete silence, and then, faintly, the sound of whispers could be heard, growing louder with each passing second. Sophie motioned for Wilson's team to follow her, and they crept forward, their guns trained on the darkness ahead. As they turned a corner, they came face to face with a group of enemy soldiers, huddled together in a small chamber, their voices barely above a whisper. Sophie took point, her pistol drawn, and Wilson's team fanned out behind her, ready to provide cover. The enemy soldiers, caught off guard, were quickly overwhelmed, and soon they were lying on the ground, their hands raised in surrender. Wilson's team quickly disarmed them, and Sophie began to question them, trying to extract any information she could about the enemy's plans. The soldiers, fearing for their lives, were more than willing to talk, and soon Sophie had gleaned a wealth of information, including the location of the enemy's command center. With this new intel, Wilson's team was able to plan a more effective attack, one that would give them a real chance of taking out the enemy's leadership. As they prepared to launch their assault, Wilson couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and admiration for Sophie, who had proven herself to be a valuable ally and a skilled fighter. But despite his growing trust in her, he still couldn't shake off the feeling that she was hiding something, that there was more to her story than she was letting on. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. The enemy's command center was located in a heavily fortified bunker, deep beneath the earth, and surrounded by layers of defenses. Wilson's team would have to fight their way through waves of enemy soldiers, just to reach the entrance, and then they would have to navigate the treacherous tunnels and corridors, to reach the heart of the bunker. It was a daunting task, but with Sophie's help, they might just have a chance to succeed. As they set off towards the bunker, Wilson's team was met with a hail of gunfire, and they were forced to take cover behind a nearby wall. Sophie peered around the corner, her eyes scanning the battlefield, and then she motioned for Wilson's team to follow her. They crept forward, using the walls and pillars for cover, and slowly but surely, they began to make their way towards the bunker. No one could have predicted what happened next. The enemy soldiers were putting up a fierce resistance, but Wilson's team was well trained, and they were able to hold their own, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As they fought their way through the enemy lines, Wilson couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at Sophie's skills. She was a natural fighter, and she seemed to know exactly what she was doing. But despite her bravery, Wilson still couldn't shake off the feeling that she was hiding something, that there was more to her story than she was letting on. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. As they reached the entrance to the bunker, Wilson's team was met with a surprise, a group of enemy soldiers, who had been hiding in wait, and were now launching a fierce counterattack. Wilson's team was caught off guard, and they were forced to fight for their lives, as the enemy soldiers closed in on them from all sides. Sophie took point, her pistol blazing, and Wilson's team followed closely behind, their guns firing in a deadly rhythm. The battle was intense, with bullets flying everywhere, and the sound of gunfire echoing off the walls. Wilson's team was outnumbered, but they were well trained, and they were able to hold their own, even in the face of overwhelming odds. As the fight raged on, Wilson caught a glimpse of Sophie, her face set in a fierce determination, her eyes blazing with a fierce inner fire. He felt a surge of admiration for her, and he knew that he could trust her with his life. But despite his growing trust in her, he still couldn't shake off the feeling that she was hiding something, that there was more to her story than she was letting on. The battle was fierce, but in the end, Wilson's team emerged victorious, the enemy soldiers lying defeated at their feet. As they caught their breath, and tended to their wounded, Wilson couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and admiration for Sophie, who had proven herself to be a valuable ally and a skilled fighter. But as they prepared to enter the bunker, he still couldn't shake off the feeling that she was hiding something, that there was more to her story than she was letting on. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. At this critical moment, a fatal mistake occurred. As they entered the bunker, Wilson's team was met with a maze of corridors and tunnels, stretching out in every direction. Sophie took the lead, her knowledge of the bunker's layout proving to be invaluable, as they navigated the treacherous passageways. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and sweat, and the sound of gunfire echoed through the corridors, growing fainter with each passing second. Wilson's team moved cautiously, their guns at the ready, as they made their way deeper into the heart of the bunker. As they turned a corner, they came face to face with a group of enemy soldiers, who were attempting to escape, their faces filled with fear and panic. Sophie took point, her pistol drawn, and Wilson's team followed closely behind, their guns trained on the enemy soldiers. The soldiers, realizing they were outnumbered, quickly surrendered, and Wilson's team took them into custody. As they continued to move through the bunker, Wilson's team encountered more and more enemy soldiers, all of whom were attempting to escape. But Sophie's knowledge of the bunker's layout, and her skill as a fighter, proved to be too much for them, and soon they were all lying on the ground, their hands raised in surrender. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Wilson's team reached the heart of the bunker, the enemy's command center. It was a large room, filled with maps and charts, and a large table, where the enemy's leaders were seated. Sophie took point, her pistol drawn, and Wilson's team followed closely behind, their guns trained on the enemy leaders. The leaders, realizing they were beaten, quickly surrendered, and Wilson's team took them into custody. As they stood victorious, surrounded by the enemy's defeated leaders, Wilson couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and admiration for Sophie, who had proven herself to be a valuable ally and a skilled fighter. But as they prepared to take the enemy leaders into custody, he still couldn't shake off the feeling that she was hiding something, that there was more to her story than she was letting on. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. As they led the enemy leaders away, Wilson couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, that the battle was finally over, and that they had emerged victorious. But as they made their way back through the corridors, he caught a glimpse of Sophie, her face set in a fierce determination, her eyes blazing with a fierce inner fire. He felt a surge of admiration for her, and he knew that he could trust her with his life. But as they reached the entrance to the bunker, he still couldn't shake off the feeling that she was hiding something, that there was more to her story than she was letting on. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape, as Wilson's team emerged from the bunker, victorious. They were met with cheers and congratulations from the other members of the resistance, who had been waiting anxiously for news of their victory. Wilson's team was hailed as heroes, their bravery and skill in the face of overwhelming odds, a testament to their training and their determination. But as they celebrated their victory, Wilson still couldn't shake off the feeling that Sophie was hiding something, that there was more to her story than she was letting on. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the celebration, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. As the night wore on, and the celebration showed no signs of dying down, Wilson found himself drawn to Sophie, who was standing on the edge of the crowd, her eyes fixed on some point in the distance. He walked over to her, his heart pounding in his chest, and stood beside her, looking out at the stars. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low and gentle. Sophie turned to him, her eyes flashing with a fierce inner fire, and for a moment, Wilson thought he saw something there, something that looked like fear or uncertainty. But then, it was gone, and she was smiling, her face set in a determined expression. "Nothing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just thinking about what's next." Wilson nodded, his mind racing with thoughts of the future, and the challenges that lay ahead. He knew that the war was far from over, and that there would be many more battles to fight, before they could finally emerge victorious. But as he stood there, beside Sophie, he felt a sense of hope, and a sense of determination, that he had not felt in a long time. He knew that as long as they stood together, they could face anything, and that they would emerge victorious, in the end. But as he looked into Sophie's eyes, he still couldn't shake off the feeling that she was hiding something, that there was more to her story than she was letting on. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the moment, but the seed of doubt had been planted, and he couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered.